Am I stable? Beispiele paranormaler Tonbandstimmen. Was sind paranormale Tonbandstimmen? Es sind Stimmen.
Reminder, time to do stability testing.
In this video, I want to see how the optical stabilization of the Canon G7X Mark III camera compares to an IBIS stabilization, say of the Olympus EM5 Mark II camera. I'm going to look at typical video and photo scenarios.
How low can you go?
Hi, I'm Scott, and this is the premiere edition of Stabilization Smackdown. First, vlogging. Right now I'm hand-holding the Canon G7X Mark III with stabilization on, but not digital stabilization because that crops in a little bit. And I've got the wide angle setting here, and I really like that. I don't really want to crop in anymore. The B cam over here is my assistant holding the Olympus EM5 Mark II camera with IBIS on, the sensor stabilization, but no digital stabilization on that one either. Okay, let's really give it a test and start walking. Now I'm walking, holding the camera. I've got it on just a little monopod here. Holding it as still as I can. Just want to see how steady this looks. Just to see how much the stabilization is working. Let's turn it off for a moment. This is with no stabilization whatsoever. That's enough of that. Now we've switched cameras. I've got the Olympus EM5 Mark II, IBIS is on, and Kaylin's got the Canon. So she can get an idea of middle distance stabilization. We're holding still now. So why don't we get up and compare the walking of both. Start walking here with the Olympus. So now we are both walking. Kaylin's doing her ninja walk, and I'm walking with the Olympus camera. It's a little bit heavier. With the 12mm lens, I'm trying to get a similar field of view to the wide end of the Canon camera, but the lens is an SLR Magic 12mm f1.6, but I've got it about almost f2.8, 2.5 probably, and it is a little bit heavy. So the whole setup's more tiring than the Canon, obviously, but heavier. If you're still, it should help you hold it a little more stable. Looking at these side by side, I'm only looking at stabilization, not the picture quality, colors, lens flare on the Olympus, anything like that. And they both look pretty good. Sitting still, the IBIS seems slightly more locked down, as you can see in this shot here, but you know, the Canon's also very good. And when we move, when we're walking, I almost prefer the Canon. I think I do prefer the Canon because the IBIS seems to show like this kind of warpy look noticeable on the background. And while there is a little bit of movement in the Canon, it's kind of natural. It's a natural kind of, it's not jarring or distracting, I don't think at all. But both pretty good in this scenario. Real world test. What's the stabilization like after a few drinks?
12 beers later.
Vlogging my best life. Let's go. Zooming the Canon to about 40 to 50mm equivalent range. This type of shot I'll probably stand still and maybe do a bit of panning, kind of documentary style, and they both look very good. There's really not much between them. Here's the Canon. Again, it looks totally fine, and I can't really tell the difference with the Olympus, so it's a wash here. Now zoomed all the way to the telephoto end on the Canon, no digital stabilization. Well, it looks pretty good. I'm holding as still as possible. On the Olympus with the 45mm lens, again, looks pretty locked down. Now with the digital, you can see it crops in a little bit. It's totally fine. And on the Olympus, very locked down with the digital image stabilization added. Digital stabilization back off with the Canon. Still looks pretty stable, although a little out of focus. And the Olympus, I forgot to turn off the digital stabilization in this shot for a direct comparison, but looks pretty good. Now let's take a look at some still images. These are 1:1 crops. This is the wide end of the Canon at 1/60th of a second. Very sharp. In fact, it's just that sharp down to 1/8. And it's after that that I start to notice drop off. But even at half a second, I think it's pretty usable, downsized anyway. Here's a full screen at half a second, and looks pretty decent. Just to compare to 1/60th, I can't really tell that much of a difference. Now zooming out all the way to the telephoto end on the Canon, 1/30th of a second is a good baseline shot. Sharpness here, acceptably sharp, even 1/15th of a second, not much difference there. So we'll compare here from 1/8 down to 1 second, and again 1/8 is pretty decent. It's pretty hit or miss after that. Half a second looks almost sharper than 1/4 of a second, but even 1 second seems better than the wide end on the Canon. Here's the shot downsized to full screen at 1 second. Pretty decent. Now comparing with the Olympus camera with IBIS on and the 45mm lens, very comparable. I'd say down to 1/4 of a second with the Canon, but definitely drops off more at half a second and a second, clearly so. If we compare 1 second to the Canon, yeah, you can see it's much blurrier. To conclude, they're both really good. Surprisingly so. I've always liked the Olympus quite a bit with the IBIS, but overall I prefer the Canon. In the situation that the Canon doesn't work as well, namely holding the camera still for video, it still works very good. And in the situations that the IBIS doesn't work as well, I really much prefer the Canon optical stabilization, because that warpiness is really not to my liking. And for photos, it's pretty much a wash. I think the Canon, again, for really slow speeds down to a second, it can be usable. So that ends the test. If you watched this far, thank you very much. This was the first video of this kind that I've ever made, and I hope to do more. We'll see you later.
Ich verstehe die Sprache nicht.